I'm lucky. I live and grew up in the South Wales Valleys. I was surrounded by open green space, mountains and trees, much like the image on the screen. It's only been over the last few years that I've come to realise that we cannot and should not take our green spaces for granted. And I have now become an active campaigner on this issue. Now, green spaces are important. They're important for our health and well-being, but they're also important places for sport and recreation, for education, for heritage, for tourism, for biodiversity, for climate change adaptation, and for flood management. In Wales, back in 2015, we introduced legislation. It was groundbreaking at the time and actually still is. This legislation puts a duty on our public bodies to consider the long-term impact their decisions will have on the well-being of future generations. The underlying principle of the Act is that no future generation should be worse off because of decisions which are being made today. Now, in 2020, our Future Generations Commissioner called on Welsh Government to introduce a standard to ensure that everyone had access to a green space within 300 metres or a short 4-minute walk from their home. Now, I've just shown you an image where we're surrounded by green space, so you may wonder why the Commissioner felt the need to do this. Well, it may surprise you to learn that in the UK, 6.3 million people do not have access to a green space within even a 10-minute walk from their home. Fields in Trust have introduced a Green Space Index, and not only does it highlight the inequalities of access to green space, but it also raises the concern that if we do nothing to help protect and increase our green space, we are going to see a further decline leading to further inequalities and making our country less resilient to the impacts of climate change. There is another issue, of course, in Wales, and that's the legacy which has been left behind by our industry. Now, Wales was once the largest coal exporter. People came from all over to take advantage of the economic opportunities offered by this black gold. It may surprise you, in the mid-19th century, Wales had the highest level of immigration figures, second only to the USA. When you compare the size of our two countries, this was a huge population explosion in Wales, and it was driven by the industry. But long before the Future Generations Act, our miners knew the importance of green spaces. So between 1922 and 1939, in Wales, our miners and the mining industry helped create almost 400 what are now known as welfare parks and welfare grounds across Wales, largely concentrated in our South Wales Valleys area. Now, they helped fund them, they helped build them, they helped maintain them, but most importantly, they help protect them. They put restrictions on these sites so that future generations, such as ours, could continue to enjoy them. Now, we owe our debt of gratitude to these miners. They gave their time, they gave their money, and they gave their passion to help create some amazing green spaces. And thanks to the restrictive covenants they have put on these lands, they have been protected from development. But what is the alternative? We need to develop. We need to have new houses. We need to have the infrastructure that supports them, the schools, the GP surgeries, the shops. Could this be the answer? We have a number of derelict industrial sites across Wales. These sites, in planning terms, are often known as brownfield sites. They're sites which have previously been developed. Now, because our communities were created around an industry which has long since gone, we've got a lot of these sites, which actually, most of them are actually in the heart of our communities. They're eyesores for our communities, but despite the fact that they're close and they're close to the infrastructure that supports them, they're not seen as attractive to developers. We need to change this. We do need to change the narrative. We also have another legacy of our coal mining industry, and that is the waste left behind from the mining. So this waste, the colliery spoil, has been put into tips across our communities. Now, it may surprise you that the mountains that surround our villages, a lot of these are actually man-made. They're man-made from colliery spoil, which has just long since greened over. Now, recently, after a period of intense rainfall, one of these tips slipped. And because of this, Welsh Government undertook an urgent survey of the tips that were remaining in Wales. Nobody wanted to see a repeat of Aberfan. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the story of Aberfan, the Aberfan disaster occurred on the 21st of October in 1966. After a period of intense rainfall, one of the coal tips slipped and the resulting slurry engulfed a nearby school and houses. It killed 116 children and 28 adults. Now, this happened before I was born, but I grew up knowing the story of Aberfan. Now, my grandfather was a journalist at the time, and he visited the site shortly after the disaster. The aftermath of this disaster stayed with him, and the impact that it had on the community. Now, in his story, which is featured on the front page of this newspaper, it was very clear that the communities themselves had been warning of this happening for years beforehand, and their voices simply weren't heard. We cannot let history repeat itself again. We have to make sure that the voices of our communities are heard and that they are actually part of the decision-making process. Now, interestingly, on the same front page, there's another article which calls for a national plan to improve the state of the tips in Wales. In this article, it mentions that there are actually 150 tips in South Wales. Well, we know now that Welsh Government have recently undertaken a survey of these tips. And it may surprise you to learn that there aren't 150 tips. There are actually 2,500. Now, these tips are largely located around our valleys communities, which is why I referenced them earlier. We wouldn't necessarily know they're there. A lot of them have now greened over. But of these 2,500, 350 of them have been noted now as being of serious concern. Now, because of their close proximity to our communities, this can obviously raise fear for the communities that live in the shadow of these tips. However, I don't want to cause fear. That isn't the intention. It is to raise awareness. But actually, these tips have been there a long time, and they are thankfully now being monitored. But this also presents us with a quite unique opportunity, because we know that these tips are going to have to be restored. We know that they're going to have to lever in investment. So this could present an ideal opportunity for our communities to really get involved and see what they would like to now see in the place of these coal tips. Now, this is an example of a tip. It's not far from my house. I live in Ystrad Mynach, it's Penalta. So as you can see, this image was taken, it was in 1985. Now, I took another image from the same vantage point almost 40 years later. You would not know that there was a tip there at all. It is a place which is amazing. It's full of biodiversity, and it's just completely green. Now, this site has actually been turned into a country park, and it's got a nod to its industrial heritage throughout the site, including a 200-metre pit pony. Now, this has been sculpted using coal waste, and it's also a nod to the animal's important role in the industry. Now, this park has become an amazing community asset. It's used by people of all generations. So you have walkers, cyclists, anglers, rock climbers. There's lots and lots of activities going on there. There's always the park run, the junior park run, running clubs, Nordic walking groups. There's lots and lots of activity on the site, and it is enjoyed by hundreds of people every single day. Now, some of these events, some of the community events that we do, they are weather dependent. And as we've seen today in sunny Nanty Moel, we do see a lot of rain in our country. But actually, that's why our valleys are so green. But it also highlights the importance that we need to do what we can to help create additional green space, which is so important for flood management and biodiversity. Now, we now come to the challenge, okay? So we know we've got lots of derelict sites which need to be developed. We know we've got developments which need to be had. We also know that we have to engage our communities in these developments. We know that we need to increase our green space. So you'd think we've got all the necessary ingredients that we need to move forward. But the bit that's missing, the challenge, is the how. How do we lever in the investment that's needed? How do we engage our communities to really empower them to know what can happen on these sites, what is possible? So myself and a number of others have joined a cohort, so it's other third sector organisations and public sector bodies. And we've come up with what we believe is the answer to this challenge, and that is to develop a scoping tool. Now, this scoping tool will be used for brownfield sites across Wales, and it'll identify the constraints, which is the usual thing that developers will look at. But instead of just focusing on the constraints, it will actually look at the opportunities. Now, the opportunities are endless. It could be that the site is improved for its biodiversity and greened, much like Penalta Park. Or it could be renewable energy. We could have solar, wind, we could have mine water heat. More importantly, we could have community-owned renewable energy so that the profits retained from that can actually go back in to benefit the communities. And we could have food growing projects helping us to deal with food insecurity and reducing food miles. We could have active travel routes helping us to get from one community to another, or to work or to education. The possibilities are endless. It could also include, small-scale housing or small industrial units, or it could be a combination of absolutely everything. I mean, how amazing would it be for these derelict sites, which have become an eyesore, to actually become places which can help us deal with some of the spatial inequalities that we've been left with as a result of our industry? Now, I'm speaking to you here from Nant y Moel, but I realise, climate change is a global issue. And wherever you are and wherever you live, there is likely to be an area of unloved space in your community. And I hope, after listening to this today, that you might feel a bit empowered, that you can actually do something about it. And working with others, working collaboratively, you can help, like how miners did before, you can help make this place a better place for future generations. Okay, thank you.